Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Oh Ship. We've got a really special episode today talking about one of my favorite subjects, culture. And the subject is culture versus speed. And it's not something that you normally hear a lot of people talking about. I think the person we're going to bring in to chat with us about it today, Chip Register, has certainly got a world of experience that's going to give him a powerful and insightful point of view on this. Chip and I actually met when I was back in my Sapient days. He went on to being the co-CEO of Publicis Sapient. If you want to talk about some, really brilliant minds, Sapient had them in spades, and he was really at the top of that pyramid. He's got a new thing he's working on that even I don't know what it is, but I know it's going to be exciting. So it's a stealth operation, but I'm hoping we're going to find out soon. And I guess you'll have to tune back into Ship when we're able to announce that. And here we go with another week of Oh Ship. Oh Ship. Great. Welcome back, and Chip, welcome to the show.
Hey, Freddie, how are you?
Good to be with you. I'm doing great. I heard we narrowly avoided our own Oh Ship moment with you today. So, near New Orleans, I'm very happy to hear that your house, your family, and everyone around you is safe. So, obviously, not a funny subject for those that did get hit, but I'm very thankful that that you and your family didn't get affected by the storm, and that you're able to join us today.
Thank you. I was perfectly prepared for us to go live here, and then also the power go out in the middle of our conversation. So, and that's happened on more than one Zoom call.
It wouldn't be the first one. So we've navigated our way through some fun technical difficulties since starting our ship. So I'm glad we pulled it off. Hey, Chip, I alluded earlier to your kind of really fascinating background. I'd love for people to understand, kind of where you came from and some of the things you've done in your career. Is there a couple of highlights you could share with the audience just to kind of establish credibility?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I can establish credibility or not, but I can tell you what I've done for you.
You're like, look at this smile. That's credibility right there.
I can tell you what I've been doing. So I actually kind of an interesting and varied career. So I started out in the military. After university, and did that for a while. And it's a little bit of maybe this is sort of a segue into a conversation about culture, because there was a lot to take out of that experience. But my career had these sort of really unpredictable turns to it. Where I was in the military, I did that for a while. Then I went to grad school and thought that I was going to teach and write books and study, international politics and security studies. And a friend of mine who had been in the Israeli Defense Force called me up one day. That I had known him through. I mean, I was in the U.S. military, but I had known him tangentially. And
which branch out of interest?
I'm sorry.
Which branch of the military?
I was in the infantry. I was an infantry platoon leader. Yeah.
Thank you for service.
Yeah, and thank you. And he called me up and he said, do you want to trade? I hadn't talked to this guy in ages. He said, do you want to trade currency on Wall Street? And I was like, what are you talking about? I was filling out applications from PhD schools, that kind of thing. I was what are you talking about? And he goes, it's exactly the profile that we're looking for. We want people that understand international relations, international politics, and all that kind of thing. And we want people that can talk on two phones at the same time. Which apparently is the only, sort of redeeming, reusable quality of an infantry officer. So believe it or not, I put the phone down, rented an Avis truck, and walked out of my fourth semester of my master's program and went to New York and did that job for 17 years. Interesting.
Quite the career job. We've talked about some good ones
exactly.
on the show.
And then similarly, I was doing that in whatever year this was, early 2000s, and Jerry Greenberg and Alan Herrick called me pretty soon after the last company that I worked for was bought by JP Morgan and sort of sent the whole leadership packing. And they called up and said, what'd you think about coming to Sapient? Right. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, what would I, what do I know about, technology or technology services or digital transformation or any of those things? And they, other than having been a client of theirs for about 10 years. And it turns out it was actually a really good fit and a great experience and a total 180 in culture, from the, the Wall Street trading culture to a place that was actually hypercultural.
Culture was everything.
And there's a whole bunch of funny stories about how I mismanaged that situation. So, but it turned out to be a great experience, led through the acquisition by Publicis of Sapient, and then I left that in 2018 and had this big old nasty non-compete. In anything in agency or technology or tech services or any of that kind of stuff. So I started doing private equity work, just as as like pickup ball, doing due diligence and target acquisition and strategy. And that was some of the big private equity firms, which has led me into my new venture, which I'll come back and we'll talk about, which is private equity backed, but back in the space.
Well, a lot of PE world, so always interesting there. And I think maybe I want to get into this concept of culture versus speed. I think we talked about Sapient for a second. Again, where we crossed paths the first time. I think had a I don't know the right term for it was, but it was culture was everything there. I mean, they hired against it. It was probably the number one criteria that they were filtering people for. They worked really, really hard to, build it into the company. At the same time, I think they also didn't take themselves too seriously. Knowing that we were speaking today, I don't know what I guess that made it pop into my head. But I'll never forget the first time I got invited to the VP offsite, and that was a really big deal for me. And I think at the time I wasn't even a VP yet. They kind of snuck me in by saying, "Hey, we just kind of managed to be at the projector or something. We're going to sneak you in as a director, but we want you there in the meeting."
Yeah,
I love playing pranks on people then and still do. And I remember joking around like, "Oh, we should put a fake slide in the then CEO's deck," and everyone was like, "You should do that." I'm like, "I'm not doing that. I've been here 7 months. You guys are going to get me fired." They're like, "Oh, now you brought it up. Now you have to do it." And I remember putting it was a slide pony with a dog sitting on its back. I think with like a little hat on, and I put on the text above it, and I really, really like ponies, and I inserted it right after like the big reveal. It was like the big strategy point that the CEO is trying to make. And I remember flicking it on, and the whole room starts cranking up, and he can't figure out why everyone's laughing at him. And then just as he went to go look at it over his shoulder, I remember flicking it back one slide. And so when he looked back, he saw the slide he meant to see there. So he was like, "Oh," and kind of turned back around and lost it. And I remember going, "Yeah, I'm dead." Apparently, but he, I don't think he ever forgot me for it. I think for a good reason. So,
that was a great
way to start a friendship.
Sapient was like known for that. They call those tools, these practical jokes. It's a part of the culture that people accept that this is going to happen to them, and it was a great bonding experience. And it was completely non-hierarchical. Like anybody could play a practical joke on the CEO, or I don't know if you remember this story or if you were there for it, but we opened a building in India, and the CEO and my co-CEO went down there to be part of the building opening, and they said, "Well, we're going to have a Hindu priest come in and bless the building. It's going to be a ceremony, blah blah blah. Would you mind wearing these robes and being part of the ceremony?" And very long story short, because there's a video of this whole thing. Very long story short, like 30 minutes later, they were married. So there was like 200 people there from Sapient. Every one of them knew that, because they all spoke the language. Every one of them knew what was happening, and they kept completely straight faces while the CEO and one of the division heads, both men, got married. So it was, but that was just part of the culture. And let me tell you what, they got my number like on day one, because I had this like blind spot. it's like if something's like gets me like angry, like I get blind. I get totally like blind. And so they would do things that I thought, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of in my entire life. When we built the building, when we moved into the building in London that we're in, this is when Sapient Nitro was kind of a new thing, and everything was all creative and all that. And Preston, who was the sort of the chief operating officer at the time, sent me a picture of the building and said, here's the sign we're ordered, in big like Toys R Us letters. It said the Happiness Factory on the outside of it. And I just went crazy. And everybody but me knew that was just a Photoshop thing they had done. They produced bills of lading. We can't turn it around. It's already shipped. It's already been ordered. And I was like, we are not having the Happiness Factory on the front of the building in London. It's not happening.
Like everyone has to wear artist berets now. That's part of the new Sapient uniform.
Yeah, and I just got madder and madder and madder, and it was just funnier and funnier and funnier. And of course, they recorded all the phone
I'd
calls.
heard about the Marinoff hair, but I never heard that one. That's a good one.
That's a great part of the culture, I thought. That was one of the things that made it really.
So I want you to talk.
Was that you could do that stuff.
I want you to talk to me about this kind of the 2x2 grid of speed versus culture. And then I think we should actually go back and maybe we can even use Sapient maybe as a reference point for them of like how, like, where do they fit into this as a kind of a tangible example. But I'd love for you to kind of explain this to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple concept, and I'm gonna caveat this up front and say, companies that I think are great companies, I'll name, and companies or places where I had experience that were knuckleheads, I'm probably just not going to name them. But
I understand.
But the 2x2 matrix I always think of, and I always thought of one of the important things. Our chief strategy officer, Bill, he said, he was a great sort of. He was a sort of a mentor of mine. He was one of my mentors. In a lot of ways, thinking about strategy and management and leadership and those things. But one thing he always said, a great pitcher can really control the speed of the game, right? If he wants to slow the game down, or speed the game up, that's one of the things that, part of the skill of a pitcher is being able to control the speed of the game. And I think, that got me thinking about the concept of speed and culture, because sometimes you want to move fast, sometimes you want to move slow, sometimes culture enables speed, sometimes culture disables speed, sometimes speed will lead you to good solutions, sometimes speed will an opportunity, sometimes it'll lead you to into the ditch. So I was always thinking about this 2x2 matrix, saying, well, good cultures can allow you to go fast. There's examples of that. Good cultures can allow you to go slow. Bad cultures can allow you to go fast, and there's problems with that. And bad cultures can allow you to go slow, which are, there's problems with that too. So I always thought of it in that sort of 2x2 matrix. So that was my.
What's interesting to me is, I think when a lot of some of what you're talking about is, when a company's got a good culture, you can, maybe deliver things faster, you can operate more expeditiously. But there's this other type of speed, which I think is growth, the growth of the company.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes, at least for me, I find that I, find myself having conversations with people, and I can even use Chameleon Collective as a reference. It's like, hey, I don't want to bring in too many more new people too quickly, because you need to let we kind of sometimes call it like, you need to let the cake settle kind of thing. You need to let the culture bake. I don't know if we're getting these cooking references, but you need that to make sure that the influx of new stuff doesn't kind of screw the culture up, because you want to let new people and let them assimilate, get them on the same culture, and then expand a bit. What's your take on that, and how do you do that at scale? Because I remember at Sapient, in some cases, we were adding 600 people a quarter at one point, maybe even more than that after I left. And I always remember thinking, like, man, that's a tricky tightrope.
And I think you manage it in two ways. One is so we didn't have, in my opinion, a problem, bringing in 600 people a quarter into a company that at its peak was, 10 or 15,000 people. Right? That wasn't a problem, because we very deliberately invested in, as you pointed out, the hiring process, the onboarding process. We had Sapient Start, which was, at its zenith was several weeks of, familiarization with Sapient. You learned how to fill out a time card and where the lunchroom was, but the rest of it pretty much was about how to
culture, working together.
A lot of it was about culture. That's right. So we really invest in that. If you don't, cultures are aspirational. You're never going to be what you would love to be, but cultures also have to be intentional, and they have to be invested in. Right. So they have to be designed and invested in, and we did a great job in my view, and other people did it, but it was designing our culture and how to invest in it was a huge priority for the company, and we spent lots of time and lots of money doing that. If you don't, you can bring on 600 people a quarter, and your culture is just the average of the people that you hired. Right. Each one brings their own, and then
better help you screen them well at the beginning. So here's a good question for you then. So let's say some smaller businesses, so good people watching this video, lots of people are going to be involved at companies that are 50 people or sub 100 people. I would argue that a lot of smaller businesses, the founder or founders almost single-handedly can set the culture by kind of sheer force of will. If they have like a big personality that really kind of defines the company. Is this kind of an example of like, how they can't move quickly potentially because they don't have the ability to scale their culture because founders are finite in terms of how much they can expand themselves? Like, any thoughts?
Yeah, which I think, I think there's always this interesting, and I'm, because of the work I've been for the last 2.5 years, I've seen a lot of this, and Sapient did 20 or so acquisitions over its, which brought me to my second point actually about expanding inorganically and just culture when you expand inorganically. But I think the founder journey is one, and then either you have to find a way to institutionalize that and pass it on to other people, or you have to leave. Right. So founders aren't appropriate at a certain scale anymore because they can't get out of the way. So that's why you see them, some people, some of them are good at institutionalizing that in the company. Jerry Greenberg and Stuart Moore, who founded Sapient, were there for 20 years, right? And they're great examples of people who intentionally got out of the way of the company and its culture. I'm sure, I wasn't there, I'm sure there was a lot of them in the early company, but then they designed the culture different, or at least independent from them as people. So so the company
they get it sort of intertwined. And I think some founders love that to be bigger than them.
Sure.
Do you think a lot of this is about some people would think, oh, it's like this company's culture is great. You can go, well, what is the culture? I don't know. It's this kind of thing, feeling in the moment. I think if you can't define your culture, clearly and in a way that's repeatable and that's easy to understand, then it stops being scalable, which I think is also
sure. Well, I think and some of that you can write down, and some of it is institutional. It's sort of an institutional memory or an institutional response, right? So culture at its the way we would talk about culture at Sapient is it's a shared system of beliefs, values, and behaviors, right? So things you believe collectively, things that you value collectively, and we have 6 core values, right? And ways that you agree to behave, right? So I think in those 3 ideas will, that's how you would set the parameters around your culture. Like I said, we wrote down 6 core values, so that's codified. Anybody could read it. They were on every coffee coaster. They were on all over the walls, all over the place, that kind of thing. But some of it, the behaviors, there was one of the best guys in our London office used to have the what he used to call the coffee mug test. And he always said, well, if you walk into the kitchen with a dirty coffee mug and you leave it on the counter and walk out, what other part of the company will you do that to? If you think it's somebody else's job to clean that up, or if you don't care what the kitchen looks like or anything like that, this small little task of sort of cleaning up after yourself? What does it say about your culture or your contribution to the culture if you'll let that happen?
Yeah.
Because then what happens on a project? What happens in a client meeting? What happens in, with an employee?
When you think about, again, looking through the lens of this kind of matrix we discussed earlier, what basically do you think is an example? Like, can you give me an example of kind of where this has gone wrong? And is there any way, if you're talking to like a leader or a a senior manager or even a business owner who might be watching this, how do people kind of try and figure out what that sweet spot is?
Well, it's an interesting question because everybody relates to it differently. Some people are very intentional about culture and think a lot about it. Some people, large firms, and go into their employee base and say, how many of you actually know what the mission statement of the company is, or the purpose statement of the company? Or any sort of, but can you tell us what the core values of your company are? I would suggest lots of people working in large firms don't have that kind of relationship to the culture of their company. So, I don't know. I know how it goes. I know why and how it goes wrong. How to help somebody with that, that sort of depends on where they start in this conversation, right? And there's some people, I always said, like, when I came out of Wall Street, right? And I am, probably top 10 least aware people in the world, least self-aware people in the world. But I knew enough to say, I'm going from this non-cultural, cultural being like antithetical to what we did, almost, right? In speculating on commodity prices or something. There's very little culture involved, right? There's no teamwork. You're actually competing against the employee sitting next to you. So it's just comes from that world into Sapient, which was like hypercultural. And I said to them, I said, you're going to have to treat me like I have some kind of a defect. For a while, it's going to take before I can actually like have conditioned responses to, I can academically get behind, beliefs, values, and behaviors, but particularly the behavior part is going to be a train wreck. So I'm going to need some support. Yeah. So and that, there was lots of times, and all those people that we've talked about so far, all of them would be happy to tell you about all the times that I screwed that up, and said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, acted the wrong way, all that because I came from an environment where I didn't even, the word wasn't mentioned. It was never mentioned. I didn't even know what it was, to a place that really, really cared a lot about it.
I love that you are willing to kind of embrace the fact, like you said, we've spirit of those ship, right? Talking about, I think, the fact you've screwed up lots of things in the past, and I get it. Is there anything that when you look back at your career, if you could say you learned a lot from, or was there kind of can maybe key defining moment that, or at least some key defining experience that kind of shaped maybe why you feel so strongly about culture, or frankly even maybe it led you to where you're at now, that you might be willing to share with any of the people watching right now? Not to put you on.
I would say there's like a book that's like everything valuable I learned in my life I learned watching Star Trek or something like that. There was a there's a I think that's a book actually, but I can't remember what it's. But for me, all the really important things, and I don't know if it's a time of life or it was the condition I was in, but I learned probably the most important and personal and enriching experiences I had all the way till I got to Sapient was in the military. Yeah. And I learned a couple of things in the military that really carried me through my whole career. One was your body can do about 8 times what your brain tells it can do, right? There's a saying in the military, can't till you have to, right? Right. Can you sleep outdoors for 6 weeks and not take a shower? No. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
It's just all these things like that. So it gets you over. It gets you over a lot of fear of heights, right? That people are self-limiting. At some point, it's like I know that I can do a lot more than my brain tells me that I can do. And when you translate that metaphor from your brain, right? I mean, you as individuals, we all have tons, but I think it translates well.
Do you think some of that is that again the military that kind of pushed that into you, or do you think it's something that
there's no way I can do that?
Yeah.
Right. And then you do it.
Yeah.
And you go, well, I guess I could because I had to. Can't till you have to, right?
Yeah.
And
it's like teaching you to kind of push yourself beyond your perceived limits. And
you just have all of these over and over again, these reinforcing experiences as I just did something I never thought I could do. Right.
Yeah.
And they're very physical experience, so they really stick with you a lot. Jumping out of airplanes and doing all sorts of things like that. You're like, I just wouldn't have thought I could do that, and I did. The other one is one of my other favorite lines out of there is, there's a fine line between bravery.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. That's funny.
Yeah. But they say, but walk up to the line occasionally. You run down the line of bravery and stupidity.
I feel like reflect a lot and think sometimes I think I was just too stupid to realize I wasn't supposed to be able to do something. A lot of the things I've tried to do in this world, and thankfully been successful at, but I was mainly because I just didn't realize I wasn't supposed to do it. And
that's right. We've all got to be a little bit of our own Magellan right out there trying to figure out how the world works. And then the last one, which is I think was probably the most impactful one from a perspective standpoint. In the military, you eat in reverse order of rank. You physically eat food in the reverse order of rank. So the most senior officer in the room will be the last person to eat, right? And if there's no more food, he doesn't or she doesn't. Right, and the most junior private eats first, right? Yeah. So, but the whole idea that's hunger that ranks exist in order to facilitate people doing whatever they're supposed to do, not to control it, right? And so when you think about that from a management standpoint, and allow people to do great stuff, right? Not to be telling them what to do, or not to be like taking credit for it, or not to be sitting. Right, to as Sapient would say, enable human potential. Right, so that's.
I love that. I couldn't agree more on the same. You're really working for everyone else versus
you work for everybody else, right? And if you don't think of it that way, you're just you wouldn't be my kind of CEO.
Yeah.
And again, you say things like this, like I say things like that, like I'm actually good at it, but I think the awareness of it is a great start. But for me, you do that. You're looking around, you're thinking about it. Didn't read in the book, right? I stood in a line in an order, right? And that leaves an impression differently than another way of learning.
There's kind of a nice succinct final question for me. When you think about this new journey that you're about to embark on with your new move, really first, how are you going to find your own balance between culture and speed?
Well, it's really interesting because it doesn't affect culture, right? A harder challenge than that to me. You can plan for that pretty well. A harder challenge is in mergers and acquisitions of the organism, right? But if you put two together, each one has a distinct culture, so you have to integrate culture as well. And you have to say easy work, right? Buying companies ain't that hard. Making 2 or 3 or 10 companies into one is really hard, right? Because the most difficult part of it all is solving the things that I think was one of the great takeaways that I took out of Sapient was they were masterful at that, in my view. I mean, this is the first company bought an above the line advertising agency. I believe I remember that being wild, right? And what a cultural collision that was. Right? We had to manage through. Now they could do it because the culture they established at Sapient allowed for the flexibility. The purpose of the company and the vision of the company was broad enough and well understood enough that kind of transformation of plopping down an advertising agency in the middle of an engineering company and saying, we're going to go build a digital agency. And everybody's like, what's that? We're like, well, we're going to show you, so it was, that's the kind, we talk about the matrix. That's like fast good, right? I mean, that's a good culture allows you to do some big things quickly. And really that's one of the great things that Sapient did well. It's the reason that they were successful, and it's one of the great things that I took out of it. Cultures didn't match at all, and somehow that didn't get discovered in time. And then you've got, feel like if I have a real some experience and some lesson, a tool in the toolbox to take into the world, into the more private equity oriented world that everybody's aware of it, but it's something that not everybody has a lot of hands-on experience doing successfully. So
I think that's a great aspirational place to wrap up today. I'm excited to hear when you're able to announce what your next big thing is. I'm looking forward to hearing it. I'm sure it's going to be soon. I always love catching up with Chip. You're a really brilliant guy, and actually listening to you talk today about how you feel about leadership and how you feel about culture and the way that drives a company. Frankly, only made me like you more. You're clearly a smart guy, but a smart guy with a big heart who appreciates other people's hearts. So thank you very much for being on Oh Ship today. And I look forward to seeing you again, hopefully in real life sometime soon, once we're all able to move around again.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed being here. It's great to obviously collaborate for years with you on all kinds of things. So I've always enjoyed every single one of them. Certainly enjoyed our time together at Sapient, but as well. So thanks for having me. Thanks everybody for watching. I'm on LinkedIn and all those kinds of things. Everybody, one of the first people to find out. The only reason we're holding everything up is a big brand launch, and I don't want to get out in front of it. But I'll.
For those of you still watching, if you haven't already liked or subscribed, if you're watching on YouTube, give us a follow. Sure, give us a like. Share with your friends. If you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, glad you're there. Please give us a like and share the video if you'd like to. If not, we hope to see you every week. We hope you enjoy the content, and thank you again for watching.